Welcome. I hope you'll enjoy this week's Q&A. We've got a question that's being asked by many people, not just in Australia, but Australian expats all around the world. I was speaking to one of our clients and he said, look, is Australian property in a bubble now? And furthermore, I've got a house there, it's doubled. Should I be selling it now? So we'll answer that in a two-part question, but we'll go through some of the reasons that housing becomes a bubble at different times, not because media reports choose to use that word, everything is a boom or a bust. It's not. And we've got to look at that as investors, not speculators. And that's the massive difference. If you're an investor, you're looking to purchase quality assets in sought-after locations that are going to continue to grow in capital value over the long term. They'll grow over time. And you have to remain patient and maintain those assets and keep them, because you've got to remind yourself that in the first instance, that's actually why you bought them. So let's have a look at this, because the answer's pretty straightforward to me. And I would say, no. Australian residential property is not in a bubble at the moment. And notwithstanding this, we need to again bring things back to everyone's individual circumstances, because we have so many different property markets around Australia. That's what I always say. It's really important to be able to do your research or have someone do that research for you, so that you make sure that you can perhaps buy into a market that offers you better value in terms of entry price, and perhaps therefore a better long-term outcome. Even though no one has a crystal ball, it's still always good to get the best, I guess, bang for your buck, as they say. So these are the things we need to look at, and it's also really important that these are only general assumptions and information that I'm actually putting out here. For anyone who wants to know specifically, like this gentleman did, about his own property, you need to actually get individual advice around that. So let's have a look at some of the reasons why bubbles are actually caused, asset bubbles. It's not enough because people say to me, oh, but money is so cheap. Yes, it is. Interest rates are super low. We've never seen them like this before. Money is really cheap. However, to form a bubble, you need to be able to access that money. Easy money, as they say. Now, we had this prior to the GFC, where in the US we had ninja loans. No income, no job. Why would you give someone like that a loan? Anyway, in Australia we had our own version. It was like a low-doc loan, which perhaps went to a no-doc loan, and banks were handing out money to people who genuinely couldn't support the repayments on those loans. The other thing that was a contributing factor is the amount of leverage that banks allow against an asset. So in these instances, we had 100% LVR or loan-to-value ratio loans, and it made it easy for asset bubbles to be formed and to be created and continued. But that's not happening at the moment. Just ask anyone who's trying to get a loan to buy a property in Sydney, Melbourne or Brisbane, and they will tell you that it is very difficult. So Australian lending standards are very robust, and they've continued to be that way. In fact, APRA have just come out, the regulators just come out and said exactly that they don't feel there's any need for concern at the moment, because they don't see a deterioration in lending standards, and they don't see an excess of what they call risky loans. So they might be high leverage or high debt to income or high loan to income sizes above 6. These are all things that need to be thought about, because to create these bubbles, we need to get hold of this money. Otherwise, it's just cheap money, which is great for people who can afford to borrow and invest and manage their loan repayments. So the other thing that's important is, as I say, this idea of investment and speculation. Most of the growth in Australian lending at the moment is being driven by upsizers, upgraders, if you like. They're owner-occupiers. Another portion that's pretty large are first home buyers, although that's taken a slight downturn over the last month or 6 weeks or so. So that's pretty important to know. These people are not speculators. housing that you live in for owner-occupiers is not a speculative asset. I mean, most people recognise that there are really large, if you like, entry and exit costs involved with these sorts of assets. So it's not a speculative asset. You're not buying perhaps a mining exploration share or something else where you can call the broker or go online, and for $20 you can go and buy or sell that asset in a millisecond. So it's really quite different. That's what people have to recognise. We haven't even got a great percentage of investors into the real estate market in Australia in this current cycle. So until that happens, I think speculation really is at a very low level on a cyclical and historical basis. And at this point in time, the cost of servicing debt, of course, has come down enormously. And people can comfortably service their debt levels. So I don't see any real issues at present that would cause alarm bells to ring. The only issue, of course, is that if you've perhaps sold a property last year or in the last 2 or 3 years and haven't got back into the market, your entry cost will naturally be somewhat higher, and in some instances quite a lot higher. So, that's what people, I think, are sort of, if you like, confusing. Not a bubble, but prices have gone up, and I think will continue to go up fairly strongly, certainly over the course of 2021 and potentially 2022 as well, before things settle down somewhat. So, something to bear in mind. Just because prices are going up does not mean that something is in a bubble. And that's something we've got to really contend with, think about, and then view what we're going to do. So now come the second part of this question. This gentleman said, well, should I sell this house that's doubled? And again, no. Especially if you're an Australian expat and it was your ex-main residence, why would you sell it and pay all that capital gains tax for nothing? Because I did ask him the question, what are you going to do with the money? Well, I'm not really sure. In that case, why would you sell it? We always say to our clients, if you're going to buy good quality assets, keep them as good quality investments for the long term. You don't need to incur transaction costs, taxes. I mean, why do that unless you have to? It's almost like people buying a new car every 2 years. Now, that's great for the economy and keeps different parts of it, like motor dealers and insurance companies and lenders, very busy and helps them make profit, but doesn't really create a lot of value for the person doing that, apart from perhaps the joy of getting into a new car. So houses are a bit different, and I think it's important to recognise that. Now, if that property had not been your ex-main residence and was an investment property, my answer would be the same. Why would you sell it? There is just no need to do so. If you're worried about potentially losing some of that profit, well, all you really have to do is wait and it will go up again. But currently we're in a cycle where it's started to go up. So the timing would not perhaps be the most opportune time to incur all those other costs for very little reason. I'm going to go through a lot of these questions in a greater amount of detail when we do our quarterly Zoom webinars in April. I think it's April the 15th is the first one. So anyone can come along, book and join us there. If they have interest in looking at Australian property markets, are there asset bubbles? If so, where do you think they are? And we'll look also in terms of financing and some of the ways you can utilise that and perhaps use all of this excess equity that's being created by just being a smart investor to potentially invest into something else again. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing you next week at our live Q&A. All the very best to all the Aussie expats around the world and all our friends back home in Australia.